PS2 is probably my favorite game console of all time. This isn't because I grew up playing it so much, or nostalgia speaking, that's a little bit in there, but when I was a kid I was laser focused on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, so I never really experienced a lot of what this baby had to offer. The PS2 was a fucking moment.
I'm here for the PlayStation 2. The best entertainment system to hit the world.
It was and still is, as of recording this video, the best-selling console of all time. 155 million units sold, and 4,000 of those going to Saddam Hussein to use as a supercomputer to launch nukes. That was an actual right-wing fear-mongering article from the PS2's launch. It's like, they expected this dinky console that could barely output 60 FPS in most games, and you think it could guide a goddamn unmanned drone? That wouldn't be the case until the 360, don't worry. PS2 game library is just as big, over 4,300 games. So many genres, so many styles, so many titles. But the unifying thing about all of them, I think, is their vibe. I think every console and the games on it kind of fit a specific vibe. Probably because the hardware is unified, has like a sort of built-in style just based on the raw computing power of it. You know, like the Genesis's soft output, which led to the waterfall in Sonic and whatever the fuck is going on in Green Dog. Like, dude, maybe we should use some more dithering. What do you think? But the PS2 prevails. In recent times, though, it seems people are forgetting to put respect on the PS2's name. One of the most common complaints I hear in modern gaming is, "Oh, it just looks like a PS2 game. My graphics ain't up to snuff because I don't understand artistic style over realism." The PS2 invokes such cozy memories and some of the best games ever made. So to me, it's not really a bad thing to look like that system. This is a critique you never see complained about in like music or movies. You know, using older techniques or equipment can help the audience get immersed into a specific style or be transported to a different moment in time that the artist is doing intentionally to help sell their story or song or game or whatever. So today, I want to talk about a few games I love that have big PS2 energy. Racing games on the PS2 are such a great showcase of what the system has to offer, usually using some neat tricks to get the graphics looking gorgeous, and the Tokyo Extreme Racer series is no exception. I mean, look at my goddamn Nissan Silvia. Oh, beautiful! This game is a little different from your normal PS2 racer. Instead of being menu-driven, having the player choose races from like a list, the game drops you in on the highways of Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya in Japan, letting you free roam about these desolate, nighttime highways, and when you encounter another racer, the only way to initiate a race is by flashing your high beams. That is so fucking cool. They made it a diegetic feature that you use on real-world cars in their virtual realm as the only way to communicate between the other cars on the road. It helps add to the atmosphere and just the vibe of like true Japanese highway racing. You know, you're driving down a long stretch, the road empty, save for the other maniacs out here racing this late at night. The streetlights paint streaks in the night sky as you whiz past, faster than usual. Nowhere to go. When you look in the windows of these machines, you see silhouettes of racers. Probably because it was a little too difficult to animate full bodies inside the vehicles this early on in the life cycle, but I think it adds a layer of immersion to the player. You are not the driver in the car. You are becoming one with the car. When I think about this game, I think of my avatar as my pink Silvia, not some dinky bozo who wears the worst goddamn fit I've ever seen. And I think that that was a stylistic choice. The developers of this game wanted you to be ingrained in the Japanese car culture, understanding the tuning and the feel of your car. If I had to nitpick one little thing I have, there's no traffic besides you and the racers and then this big ass Genki racing project truck. And I think this was because the Japanese government wouldn't let developers use the highways if they were populated, so it's basically like the highway has been closed down for these racers. I was trying to find some sources on this, but I came up empty. I could have swore I saw it in like a YouTube video or something a long time ago, so if you have any more info, leave it in the comments so we can talk about it. They don't really explain it in the game, but it is a minor thing. The TXR series is really interesting to check out if you like things like Initial D, or Tokyo Drift, or tuner and JDM culture in general. I feel like this game could also be a gateway into those things, so if you like this game, maybe check out Initial D if you know, I'm not an anime weeb, but Initial D is good. I really like the Drift sub-series of the Tokyo Extreme Racer series. These are more sim-focused racing games. Tokyo Extreme Racer Drift 2. That is chef's kiss. So good. Something that I think makes the TXR series really special is its focus on like a monolithic game design. You know, we want to have a fun simulation of racing and let the player really immerse himself in that world by having a majority of the time you spend in-game actually driving. You think of Gran Turismo or something and it's like, you're racing for 5 minutes at a time, and then you're in the menu. Right, like in this, you get in the car, you drive, and you can choose to race or not, you can just drive around. And I think that's what makes it so impactful on me. Once you get your car tuned or upgraded, you enter the C1 loop and basically spend the whole night there. It's very similar to the culture depicted in something like Initial D, but with a stronger emphasis on highway racing and not really getting into anime drama plots, you know? In the real world, this is kind of how it be. You know, you spend all day fixing up your ride, then you hit the streets to prove yourself. And I think that that is so sick. PS2 was also home to some great action-adventure games similar to the Zelda series. Having just had the GOAT, Ocarina of Time, come out just about 2 years earlier, there was a very fresh concept that so many developers were taking from. One standout series of games comes from an interesting source, From Software. Nowadays, obviously known for the Dark Souls series and Armored Core, but back on the PS2 and PS1, they were making a lot of really cool, punishing, first-person action-adventure games that are often considered the predecessors to the Souls series. Games like King's Field, the early Armored Core games, Eternal Ring, Echo Knight, Ender Star, Eldune's King, Framegrad, all that shit. But at the launch of the PS2, From Software was coming out swinging with 3 games. Armored Core 2, the 4th installment to that series, Eternal Ring, which is sort of an amalgamation of Shadow Tower and King's Field, and a brand new type of game for this developer, a third-person action game, Evergrace. Evergrace plays like your typical post-Ocarina of Time action-adventure. There's a wonky-ass camera system despite having 2 analog sticks, which feels kind of cozy and cute nowadays. And I'd argue they did this because at the time, Z-targeting from Ocarina was so fresh and comfortable that having a similar system was easier to implement and would have a baked-in audience to understand exactly how it works. While Evergrace doesn't target for you, the camera snaps to right behind the character if you just press the R1 button. Nowadays, I think we take for granted the fact that there's basically a de facto control scheme, and if you don't adhere to it, your game is considered janky or whatever. I miss the era when getting a new game meant learning how to play that game, understanding the unique mechanics and design decisions the developers made in order to tell their story or explore some mechanics in a fun way. From Software is a developer who always had unique takes on controls, and they still continue to explore new ideas today. I think that's part of why they're so well regarded right now in the industry. While the idea of third-person action games are inherently kind of PS2 in nature, Evergrey stands out in the genre by having its setting be so fully realized thanks to its strong art direction and, of course, the soundtrack. Kota Hoshino, the in-house composer from Software, hits it out of the park on this game, and honestly is one of my favorite soundtracks of all gaming. It's weird, it's moving, and it's just addicting. Ever since I heard Shopping with Palmyra Ore, I have not been the same. When creating the soundtrack, Hoshino was inspired by the human voice, using samples of his own as the main instrument, manipulating them with computer software, and then composing hauntingly beautiful music with it. The sounds created invoke feelings of a land that isn't post-apocalyptic, but like mid-apocalyptic. Shrieks from far, far away with anxious and pounding, almost tribal drums, driving you to press on. And you do, because it's so interesting and weird, and you just need to see a little bit more. While the combat in this game ain't too much to write home about, I find myself going back to its simple but relatively deep loop with excitement. Similar to a Zelda formula, you go on a linear path, you reach obstacles that you can't overcome until you use a new skill you get from the shop or, from the dungeon. For example, I was stuck around this maze until I found a room with a fireball sitting on a pedestal. And when I swung my Moonlight Greatsword at that bit, it just bonked me backwards. Turns out you need to use an ice move. So I go to the shop, upgrade my armor, which lets me unlock an ice sword attack. Go back, ice the fireball, door go open. Simple, intuitive, and multiplicative. Eat your heart out, Aonuma. From's been having ice put out fires for 20 years. The depth of the combat comes from the enemies and their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. You might have a guy who guards as soon as you wind up, so you gotta either bait his attack and move out of the way, smack him in the back of the head, or go fucko mode and use the guard break Palmyra action and just plug him up. Upgrading weapons makes number go up, and it's never too difficult to make the encounters frustrating. If you're a fan of this developer's other games, I highly recommend checking this game out. You'd be hard-pressed to find a similar experience outside of its sequel. PS2 was home to just so many games like this, with uniquely rich and complex worlds that are just a joy to go back and explore even today. It seems to me that the PS2 was the beginning of sort of a modern era of gaming where developers were able to start creating worlds that had this slightly more openness. The PS1 and N64 definitely had their fair share of great worlds, but the openness of Banjo-Kazooie or Jumping Flash is not exactly the same as something like Final Fantasy XII or Monster Hunter or GTA 3. But that brings me to today, a modern PS2 game, Bomb Rush Cyber. Very rarely do we get games in this awesome AA PS2 budget and time commitment size that have a true unique style. And Bomb Rush is a goddamn triumph. Team Reptile came and did an around the world bar spin to Manny on your ass and released a good ass game. Taking elements from Jet Set Radio, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, Super Mario 64, the Dreamcast in general. This game has come to show you MFers how to make a goddamn menu screen. How about that? Now I know what you're saying. This video is about the PS2, and this is very not PS2. Just based on the series, it's spiritually succeeding. But I think the overall structure and storytelling of the game is of the PlayStation 2 variety. Escaping prison, beating up cops, doing crime, and then getting your head chopped off. And that's just the opening mission. So after all that, you wake up with a cyber head, and you go on a fun little anime adventure to go all city by having your graffiti completely paint the town, in order to uncover the mystery of why your head was cut off to begin with. Kinda dumb, pretty fun, and unobtrusive enough to never bog down the runtime or bore me to tears. 9 times out of 10, I just laughed at how silly it all was, and I like that. I like that this game can just not take itself so seriously, but it gives you enough to keep trekking and just learn what the hell's going on. And then, the gameplay comes in and just goes, ugh! Taking the basis of Jet Set Radio's gameplay, skating around and tagging graffiti at designated spots, Team Reptile has just expanded and massaged that formula right to perfection. A little while ago, I tried out Jet Set Radio Future and I just didn't understand how it all worked. I kinda just brushed it off without giving it a fair shake. When I saw this game get announced, I didn't think it wasn't for me, because I want to like these games, they're so cool. I thought that a modern version of it would probably be my best bet, and I'm so glad I took the plunge. One thing I learned from Bomb Rush is that these games just aren't Tony Hawk Pro Skater. It's not about getting a massive, unique combo by button mashing a million different tricks, but instead it's more of a halfway house between Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Super Mario 64, using the latter's platforming challenges and flow state, combined with the movements of vehicles like skateboards, rollerblades, and BMX, creating its own beautiful little zen hangout garden where you can do graffiti and listen to drum and bass and look cel-shaded and cool. I don't know if there's anything better than that. Going back to the first two games I discussed, I feel like they each had a little PS2 energy that, when combined, kind of encapsulates the full vibe of Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. Evergrace's strong art design and deep world building, and TXR's monolithic game design, stretching simple mechanics out over full games and actually being pretty fun to engage with, despite a lack of super incredible depth. Where Bomb Rush outshines these two is that it's got time on its side to sand off some of the rough edges, still harkening back to that beautiful era of gaming.
Come on, everybody!
This wasn't a full review of Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, per se, but more of a recommendation. A recommendation to gamers: say, play this game and don't be so upset if it looks like a PS2 game and is over in 10 hours. That's good. But more so to devs, please make more PS2 games. They make me happy. Thank you. Bye bye.
Sweet, 今始まる